Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Virginia Transit Association's webinar, FTA's Guidance on Civil Rights, Title VI, and DBE. I'm Lisa Guthrie, the Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association, and we're pleased to offer this webinar for you because we know you've had some questions about Title VI and civil rights. I want to thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance that enabled our FTA presenters, Lynn Bailey and Aida Douglas, to put together a presentation especially for you. And I would like to introduce them at this time. Lynn Bailey is a Regional Civil Rights Officer for FTA's Office of Civil Rights and supporting grantees in Regions 2 and 3. Prior to joining FTA, she was a Senior DBE Program Specialist for 6 years in the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority's, otherwise known as SEPTA's, DBE Program Office. While at SEPTA, she gained invaluable experience with DBE certification, contract monitoring, DBE goal methodologies, and public outreach. Aida Douglas is a program analyst for the FTA Office of Civil Rights. She has over 15 years of experience in the area of civil rights, and her previous experience includes serving as the manager of the Office of Diversity for Capital Metro, the transit system in Austin, Texas. She also served as the acting regional civil rights officer for FTA Region 6 and Fort Worth, Texas, which included Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Arkansas. Her areas of expertise include DBE, Title VI, and EEO. She has also worked with the ADA team to provide technical assistance to grantees. Aida assists the regional civil rights officers with program reviews as well as technical assistance as needed. I want to thank both of you for providing this informative and very helpful information for us today. We're recording the webinar and it will be posted on YouTube with a link on our website, our VTA website, along with the slides for on-demand viewing. So today, since we are addressing your pre-submitted questions, we will not have time or much time for a question and answer session. However, we can send your post-webinar questions to the FTA presenters. You can send those to me and I will forward it on to them. We'll compile your questions after the webinar, send them to Lynn, Aida, and send their responses out to everyone who's attending today. This is how to send us your questions. Look for the webinar panel on your screen and simply type your question into the question box. And although the questions won't be answered during the webinar, you can submit your question at any time. We'll hold on to them for later. Remember that the audience is muted, so we'll be unable to hear you during the webinar. And with that, it is my great pleasure that I now turn the webinar over to our presenters, Lynn Bailey from FTA and Aida Douglas. Take it away, Lynn.
Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to say thank you for having us, and hopefully you will gain some great insight in terms of guidance for your DBE and your Title VI programs of which you maintain. So without further ado, I'll just get started. And this morning's outline, basically we're going to try to touch on what the DBE requirements are, what some DBE goal requirements and the principles are, a little bit about goal setting, which is a two-step process and is coupled with the consultation and publication. And we'll also touch a little bit on race conscious and the race neutral split that is required, and kind of summarize these items at the end of this particular segment of the presentation. So what is DBE? DBE is the U.S. Department of Transportation's grants recipients requirement to establish a disadvantaged business enterprise program in accordance with the regulations of U.S. DOT 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 26. 49 CFR 26 applies to the following grantees under these administrations: the Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Highways Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Who must have a DBE program and set goals? The regulation in 26.45 indicates that all FTA recipients that expect to award more than $250,000 in FTA funds and prime contracts, this is excluding transit vehicle purchases, must have a DBE program and set applicable goals within a 3-year triennial period. So these are just some of the preliminary requirements to determine, in case you're asking, do I need to have a DBE program? And first answer that question for yourselves. What is a DBE? The DBE program must be submitted to the federal agency administering the grant and updated every time there's a major change. One of the requirements for the DBE program is that you develop a goal methodology that must be submitted within the 3 years, and also you must do semi-annual reporting. And many of you know, or probably know, that you must do your reporting on June 1st and December 1st of each fiscal year. When developing the goal, just another note, when developing the goal, this is the goal methodology is your method or process by which you intend to meet the overall goal established. And we'll talk a little bit about this shortly, but developing a goal is not just the DBE program office's responsibility. You will come to learn that it is a team effort that includes several divisions of your agency to help to develop before you submit it to the FTA or your administering agency. The goal should include your capital construction department. It could include your planning department, but it should be a team effort in doing so. The overall established goal should be a look ahead of projects and contracts that the agency foresees within the 3 years ahead. What's included in your DBE program? Well, the first thing that is a great idea to do is to look at the the regulation 49 CFR Part 26. The regulation outlines all the steps that need to be included in your program. You want to look at each section, which has a short definition of how your agency meets the requirement by the section. It's important to have a copy of it, as well as to look to see how it applies to you and how you need to provide a program based on what the requirements are. Some agencies use templates, but you really want to make sure that your program is tailored to your specific agency. It also needs to include a signed policy. This is a must that must be included. And basically a policy is that document or statement that is typically signed by the head of your organization, a general manager, the CEO, that basically says, my agency, on behalf of everyone in this particular agency, we are going to follow and abide by the rules and regulations of the DBE program, and it's basically a confirmation that we understand what the regulations dictate and that we are going to administer our DBE program to the best of our ability based on these guidelines. The new thing that is included, that must be included in the DBE program as of 2012, was the small business element, and that was the part of the regulation that was added, and it's 26.39, where not only does an agency administer the DBE program, but they're also, according to the old, the previous regulations as they were established, but also the small business element looks at businesses based on size, not necessarily ethnicity, in addition to ethnicity. So the small business element was probably the most recent major change that most agencies submitted within the past couple of years. The other thing that's included in your DBE program is your goal methodology. It's submitted as a separate document, but must be included in the program. The organizational chart showing the DBE liaison officer, sometimes you'll see the abbreviation as DBELO. That is the person who is the direct contact for FTA with regard to who's administering the program. The DBE liaison officer should have independent access to the president and CEO or general manager of the organization. There should be a direct link from that particular position to the head of your organization. And any other attachments that should be included with the documentation for your program should be included as well. So just to go over the DBE program and the 4 key elements, the DBE program document must be included, goal-setting methodology, which we'll touch on shortly, semi-annual reporting, which I mentioned is performed June 1st and December 1st of each fiscal year, and monitoring and oversight. And typically, this dictates how the agency will monitor contracts and performances of the programs and projects such that the goal that you established previously is met. So contract monitoring, and this is a process where agencies are required to do this reporting, and really the monitoring, the oversight helps you do your semi-annual reporting on a biannual basis. But the monitoring and the oversight, I'd like to say, is kind of like the cradle to the grave type of process where your contracts, you're looking at them from the beginning, the projects are going forth, and you're looking at and monitoring and providing oversight to see how well are we achieving the goal that we set forth in our methodology. So that is it's difficult when agencies begin, we set a goal, we have a project, we have a contract, and they do nothing in between to see how well the project is coming along with regard to their DBE requirements. Okay, so as I mentioned, your DBE goal methodology is a requirement that is due on August the 1st. And a lot of times, as I mentioned, this is a team effort. And one of the things that you need to submit is not only the letter stating that your overall goal for the 3 fiscal years, but you also need to get in to describe how do you do so from a race-neutral and race-conscious participation perspective. So RN is race-neutral and RC is race-conscious, and we'll get to more of that as well. You want to provide to FTA a copy of the methodology you use to develop the goal. You want to include worksheets, spreadsheets, charts, etc. You want to also be sure that you have a clear and thorough explanation of all the required elements. You must show your work, kind of like in grade school when you're doing math programs. You want to show how did you achieve the goal setting that you had? What's the methodology? What's the step-by-step process by which you have done so? The other thing with regard to the goal methodology is that your goal methodology needs to be published. It needs to be on your agency's website. Previously, agencies seems as though they would only put it on the website for a particular period of time, but now they are required to do so for the entire triennial period. That established goal and the methodology should be on your agency's website so that it's accessible. The other thing that's important is public consultation. Some folks call it the consultative process, but it is the process and activities that include the scheduled, direct, and interactive exchange that you have with your constituents. One of the things that you will come to learn is that every requirement that FTA has in terms of a program, typically there has to be some type of public engagement. You can't set goals and you can't just make changes, if you will, without involving constituents. You're writing public and for others to provide feedback on the changes or the proposals for goals that you have. So your DBE goal must be based on demonstrable evidence of the availability of ready, willing, and able DBEs relative to your businesses, to all businesses that are ready, willing, and able to perform and participate on DOT-assisted contracts. The measure is the relative availability of businesses that are able to compete for contracts that you let. This process provides a way to quantify the businesses in your surrounding area that are able to compete for the work in your upcoming projects. So you must reflect on what you also expect to be your levels of deep participation and to be absent of the effects of discrimination. No longer are recipients able to rely on, as the regulation mentioned, the 10% national goal. In order to maintain a narrowly tailored program, each grantee must submit a goal tailored to your local circumstances. A minimum DBE goal is not required, and the DOT does not necessarily approve your goal, but we do review and concur on the methodology, and that is the important piece about showing your work. How did you arrive at the goal that was determined? So it's important to, in your methodology, not only just to dictate what is the overall goal, but also show the projects that are being forecasted. I can't stress that enough. Be sure to make sure that it makes sense. Spell it out so that there is no question about, okay, how was this goal determined? If there's questions that FTA may have about it, you have a method that a step-by-step method of how you arrived at it in case there is discussion that needs to take place. So the reference for setting goals is 49 CFR Part 2645, but the other tip that will come later in a list of resource websites is the tips for goal setting in the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. And this particular, I'm going to call it a Cliff Note. It is a 13-page Cliff Note or resource of the DBE program, the federal regulation that helps grantees go through the steps of determining, of setting goals. So it is a very plain language resource, and I encourage everyone to take a look at that. If this is your triennial period where your goal is due, be sure to kind of look at the step-by-step process by which was laid out in that particular resource. When setting your goals, this is, as I mentioned, is a two-step process. You want to be able to use all available data. State UCP directories can be considered to set your baseline. It's definitely not your sole source of information. You may want to consider other disparity studies, Census Bureau statistics, bidders list, and information from other DOT recipients, especially those recipients that kind of sit close to each other, because sometimes you may share some area as far as where DBEs may reside, I would say. And you want to also be sure to be using the most refined data sources whenever possible. You definitely want to accurately account for contracting opportunities. So that's where we were mentioning that sometimes look in the departments in your organization that do the planning, or your engineers, or those that are directly tied to the projects that your agencies will perform. These folks are definitely good resources for performing your goal methodology. You don't want to simply rely on past participation as a base figure, and you want to utilize your local preference. So just simply relying on your past participation, the past doesn't necessarily dictate the future. So you surely want to do the 3-year look ahead, and the same, the same projects that might have happened 3 years ago aren't necessarily going to happen in the next 3 years to come. So here's a little example. Grantee A will be receiving approximately $1 million in FTA assistance for fiscal years 16 through 18, and will be using all of the money to construct a new business maintenance facility. In the course of its preparation, 15 DBEs and 110 non-DBE firms are identified for being ready, willing, and able to perform the project. What is Grantee A's base figure? So the simple math for performing the base figure calculation is the 15 DBEs divided by 125 total firms that are all ready, willing, and able. And your base figure is calculated to be 12%. Once a base figure has been calculated, recipients must examine any other evidence that's available to them that might allow them to adjust the figure, the base figure, as merited. Some of the evidence that you want to consider with doing so, you want to look at current capacity of existing DBEs to perform the work. You want to look at disparity studies if they weren't used in step 1. And you also want to get input from interested parties, your local chambers of commerce, the NAACP, minority business associations, contracting associations. These are your resources. These are your stakeholders, what we call stakeholders, that can give you some input while you're going through the goal methodology construction. So not only do you utilize the resources inside your agency, but you also want to reach out to get input and feedback from those outside. And of course, with adjusting the base figure, you also want to consider what was the past participation. You can consider past participation in this case, because you want to look at, well, the goal that we established in the past triennial was XYZ, and how well did we meet that? And then just kind of looking ahead is kind of using the past to project how participation might be, but you definitely don't want to just solely rely on past participation and just say, we're just going to adopt what we adopted the last triennial. You want to use past participation if contracting opportunities are similar to those in prior years, and this is what I was mentioning. That can be the case, but sometimes it's not the case all the time. In such instances, recipients must determine the median past participations and average that number with the base figure determined in step 1. Here's an example. We want to assume that we had a 13% base figure with the past participation for the past triennial years of 3%, 7%, and 14%. In this case, the median is 7%. It is not, please remember that is not the average. 7% is not the average of the past 3 years. So the median is the middle value. So the adjusted goal is 10%. We took the base figure of 13% plus the 7% median and divided that by 2, which gave us an adjusted goal of 10%. And this is just another example. The past 3 years, 14, 3, and 7, the median, and the adjusted base figure working out to be 10%. We also, so again, we want to look at current capacity, disparity studies, if any, and input from our local stakeholders. Race conscious. Race conscious is the measure or program that is focused specifically on assisting only DBEs. It includes DBEs owned by women, and it involves setting contract goals. On the other hand, a measure or program that is or can be used to assist small businesses that doesn't utilize contract goals is a race-neutral measure that can be used to meeting the goal. So the two means of meeting overall goals is either via race-neutral or race-conscious measures. And what the regulation states in 2651, it says that recipients must meet the maximum feasible portion of their overall goals by race-neutral means. So when we talk about race-neutral, a DBE will win a contract competitively, simply like a prime contractor would do so. The recipient must establish contract goals to meet any portion of the overall goal they project will not be met via a race-neutral means. And race-conscious simply means that you set contract goals to establish DBE participation. So these are the questions that you may want to ask. Of the overall goal, how much can be achieved via race-neutral means? Are the available contracts attainable by small firms? And so your contract goals are your race-conscious means of achieving the DBE participation. Just some examples of how you can assist to do some proactive race-neutral measures, to implement some race-neutral measures so that the small firms can obtain participation on such contracts. You want to utilize your DBE prime contractors. You want to make requests for proposals and solicitations attractive to DBEs. Sometimes DBE firms, they may think, well, I'm too small, or I can't do that project, but there are things that you can do to make it more palatable for those small firms. Another option is to unbundle contracts. Sometimes a contract that might be $10 million is something that is a little intimidating to a small DBE firm, but if it's broken down into parts where certain sections, a DBE firm may say, you know what, I can handle this. I have the technical capacity and the financial capacity to take on this section of the project, but you know, considering that they might not be able to take on a huge multi-million or billion-dollar project. So these are proactive measures for you to engage DBE firms to participate in a race-neutral way. Simplifying or reducing bonding, we found, and I found in my experience that small firms don't even have the capacity to get bonding. And a lot of times, outreach to help them to do so is something that might give them the extra edge to be able to participate as a prime contractor. And so your outreach to these DBEs is critical for them to be able to participate. You also want to distribute DBE directories to prime contractors. Sometimes prime contractors have a hard time getting in contact with DBEs as well. So you'd be surprised. And small business set-asides or implementing the small business element is another way of performing for obtaining contracts in a race-neutral way. So your race-conscious means of DBE participation is permitted only when projects are not able to be met by race-neutral means. They may be used only on DOT-assisted contracts with subcontracting opportunities where there's no set-asides based on race. They're not required on all contracts. Every contract that you prepare to bid out does not necessarily have to have a goal set. Contract goals need not match the overall goals, and that's what your overall goal may be 1%, but depending on the scopes of work and the type of NAICS codes that might be utilized, you want to tailor some projects to approximate or relative availability for particular, for the particular contract or project. And then you need to be able to adjust contract goals based on DBE achievement. So if you find that your contract goals are not being met, you may have to adjust them upward. Likewise, if you find that you're exceeding the contract goals that you've set, you want to adjust them downward. So this is the key, another key that suggests that your agency must continue to monitor goal achievement during the course of the project. In terms of calculating the splits, you want to adjust your race-conscious and race-neutral splits based on past achievement, provided similar contracting opportunities exist. Here's an example. Grantee A's fiscal year 13 through 15 overall goal was 10%, with 5% projected to be met via race-neutral means. Well, Grantee A experienced an overall 12% DBE achievement. In 16 through 18, Grantee A's overall goal was 10%. What should Grantee A's race-conscious and race-neutral splits be for 16 through 18? So for fiscal year 13 through 15, it was 10. The past achievement was 12. That showed that they had a race-neutral participation of 7%. So it was 5% projected plus an additional 2%. So previously, 58% of the overall goal was achieved via race-neutral means, and race-conscious was 5%. So given the past achievement, the fiscal year 16 through 18 split should be 4.2%. The overall goal was 10, but now considering that we're looking at how the achievement happened in the previous triennial, the 58% of the 10% overall goal that we're projecting for fiscal year 16 and through 18 will be 5.8%. So the difference between 5.8 and 4. The 10% and the race neutral portion is the 5.8, and thus your race conscious portion will be 4.2%. And the combination of the two is the overall 10%. Consultation. This is the important piece that all agencies must conduct when they are performing their goal methodologies and soliciting feedback. Consultation is a requirement. It is not an option. It is absolutely a requirement. And consultation must be a scheduled, direct, interactive exchange, whether it be a face-to-face meeting or event, a video conference, or a teleconference, in which many of the interested stakeholders are able to come into your agency or talk to your agency to focus on obtaining information relevant to the goal-setting process. This must occur before you submit your methodology to FTA. And again, that reference for that information is 49 CFR Part 26 through 45. So it is absolutely, we can't say it enough, that it is a portion of the methodology process that has to happen before you submit your document or your methodology to FTA before being reviewed. The published notice must be posted on your internal website and may be posted in other sources: minority-focused media, trade association publications, newspapers, especially those of where your agency touches those communities. The notice announcing your proposed overall goal must be published before submission to any of the operating administrations as mentioned. At your discretion, you may inform the public that the proposed overall goal and its rationale are available for inspection during normal business hours at your principal office for a period of 30 days. So yes, you can invite stakeholders the opportunity to come in and take a look at your goal and discuss it with your agency. The notice of the comment period must include addresses to which comments may be sent. The public comment period should not extend the deadline date. So just some key details to kind of quickly go over. The DBE goal must be expressed as a percentage of FTA funds that you're going to utilize in contracting opportunities. You must include your race-neutral, race-conscious split, and your public participation must include a copy of your published notice on your agency's website and a summary of the consultation process is essential. You want to make sure that you have a record of the feedback that you received as a result of the consultation process. Hopefully, the individuals who are asking questions or suggesting feedback, that your agency kind of takes that in consideration and may adjust the goal based on, as it's feasible for doing so. So just in summary, make sure that your triennial goal is submitted to FTA by August the 1st. I'm using the word TRAMS now because many of you know that TRAMS has replaced TEAM. Even though TEAM is in a read-only mode, most grantees are getting up to speed on TRAMS, and that's where you will now be able to submit and upload your goal methodology along with your other civil rights programs. Make sure that when you're doing so with submitting your goal methodologies that you could put a cover letter stating your overall goal and including the RC RN splits. That is it is not necessarily a requirement, but it is a good preface that your RCRO will appreciate before getting into reading and reviewing your goal methodology. Be sure to show your work, show your work, show your work. And again, FTA only approves the methodology. Well, we review and concur. We don't approve the goal itself. So your work should dictate why the goal was established as such. You may want to have a copy. You want to have a copy of your published notice on your website, and then also ensure that your consultation process was conducted and was documented. Just to give you some useful websites for training as well as just for resources, please be sure to utilize FTA's public website. And there are some links that will take you to the civil rights section, and you'll find various links here with regard to more training, videos, and some common questions about the DBE program and other civil rights programs. So I just want to say thank you, and please submit your questions, and we'll try to respond as soon as possible for everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Now we'll move forward into the Title VI portion of the presentation. I will try to move quickly since I know we only have about 20 minutes left, and I'll try to address questions that I received prior to the presentation. Again, I'm going to focus on the overview of Title VI requirements as they're stated in the final circular 4702.1b. I do want to say that the circular is currently being looked at for revisions. I'm not sure how long that will take, but the revisions are not necessarily changes to the circular itself, but more than likely there will be clarifications to some sections that grantees have been asking for some further clarifications, specifically in the areas of service and fair equity and also facilities Title VI equity analysis. So I'm going to move forward. So to go back, the circular was revised from the 2007 version of 4702.1a. That was the first guidance that FTA provided to grantees. And that circular, when it was revised in 2012, the 4702.1b version, wanted to provide more clarity, more accountability to agencies and its board, more transparency, and more consistency throughout the program itself. The circular mainly separated environmental justice from the Title VI circular. If you recall, the previous circular had only one page talking about how to conduct an EJ analysis, and then that was updated and separated in 2012, where FTA developed an environmental justice circular 4703.1, which all of you may already be familiar with. Just to make a note, FTA does not really encourage the mentioning of your EJ initiatives in your Title VI program. And I know that's a little bit different from the federal highway side, that it requires some EJ portions to be included. And I know that's created some confusion among grantees that are submitting a program that want to meet both FTA and FHWA's requirements. What I'll say to that is, as long as your program meets FTA's requirements as listed in the circular, FTA will accept that even if you have additional information because of state DOTs, and if there's any state DOTs on the line, you will know that they're a little different, but as long as those requirements are met, FTA will review it and provide feedback for you. Again, the difference between Title VI and environmental justice is something that grantees struggle at times because of the regulation requirements. And just to note some of the differences, environmental justice is an executive order, and it applies to federal agencies, and the federal agencies rely on the grantees to adhere to the requirements. And the recipients are the ones who facilitate the compliance by FTA in agencies like FHWA to comply with the executive order. Title VI is a law, it's a statute. It's a regulation that was approved by Congress. It applies to recipients, and FTA oversees the recipient's compliance to Title VI, and that is why you have to provide a program that states what you will do to ensure compliance with Title VI regulations. There we go. The circular is provided in different chapters. There's 9 chapters that are extremely helpful. So if you have not already gone through it and looked at the chapter that pertains to you, I highly recommend it to become familiar with the language. And the appendix section is extremely helpful to those of you that are trying to see examples. Highlights of the circular, again, it provides more clear guidance on the relationship between Title VI program requirements and also the DOT's Title VI regulation. It kind of goes on a step-by-step basis. It clearly describes on a checklist what you need to include in the program, and it has an in-depth appendix section that includes graphs and flow charts for those of you that rely and are more visual. Again, the general requirements applies to transit agencies, to MPOs, to state DOTs, recipients of special funds such as Tiger and Urban Circular grants, and also to subrecipients. Although subrecipients are not required to submit the program. Now, where do you go? Let me get to a breaking point, and I'll answer one of the questions about where to get training. On the subrecipients and contractors, we talked about each subrecipient has to develop its own program, and they may use elements of the primary recipient's program to ensure that they adhere to the regulation. But there are certain sections that a subrecipient cannot borrow, such as the complaint process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you have a contractor, and in the spirit of this section, a contractor is referred to someone who the primary recipient hires to run its service, such as a operation type of service. So you'll be having an agency that is the primary recipient, and they have transit services outsourced to a contractor such as First Transit or Transdev, now that Veolia is not Transdev. Such contracts, the contractor does not have to have its own program, they have to implement the recipient's program. And I know there was a question similar to that. There's some terminology that it's based in the definition section, who the primary recipient is, and this is the term used for the recipient that receives funds and then pass funds through subrecipients. There's a minority transit route. This term was used previously in the previous circular in the analysis of service equity. However, this was taken out and it's only used for the service monitoring and not for service and for equity analysis. They also introduced disproportionate burden. which applies to impacts on low-income populations for service and fair changes. And I want to highlight that this is something that FTA added to because Title VI does not protect low income. That is an EJ protection, and as you recall, EJ used to be part of the circular in the prior version. So when you have disproportionate burden, you're looking at the impact to the low-income community, but that does not necessarily mean if there is an impact that it's a Title VI type of violation, since low income is not part of a protected class. However, if people within the low income happen to be protected classes under Title VI under race, color, and national origin, then you would have to adhere to potential violation of that. So again, here's real quick the requirements. Submitting a program applies to all recipients, and again, this should have said TRANS, not team. And in TRANS, the section for civil rights to submit your program, it has been improved. It'll show you the dates that your programs are current, the date that your program is due, and if you have a review of your program and it was returned to you, it will also allow for you to make changes within a period of time. The Title VI program must be approved by the grantee's board of directors or the appropriate governing body if you happen to be a state DOT. That also applies to subrecipients. The subrecipient has to submit documentation of their program as submitted to their primary recipient. And Title VI programs are due 60 days prior to expiration. This is so that our CROs, the regional civil rights officers, have time to review those programs. There's in TRANS, the determinations are concur, in review, and expire. The same will remain. There are going to be some additional requirements that FTA, Office of Civil Rights, is implementing. So in many cases, when you will get an in-review letter, you will get a document that we are referring to as a voluntary compliance agreement, and it's the acronym is VCA. And if you have not already received one, if you're on the call, what it is if we review your program and it has several deficiencies, you will get this in-review letter with the deficiencies noted, along with your voluntary compliance agreement. The compliance agreement will be expected back within 30 days of your letter, with the understanding that the deficiencies that are noted in that letter and in that plan, the agreement, will be fixed and the corrective action will be performed within 120 days of the letter that was issued. So that will alleviate some of the time constraints that some of you have to have because there's a lot of different moving parts that are associated with some of the issues that have to be addressed. And then, of course, expired and expiration is not one of the determinations you want, because that will prevent you or will hold access to federal funds, and your grants will not move forward if your program is in this status. In the program requirements that all recipients must have, there's 8 elements that are contained in every program, and you have to ensure that these are listed, and if you can include them and put them in your table of contents for easy access by the RCROs who are reviewing your program, that would be the Notice of Rights under Title VI. This is different than your Title VI policy that some of you have included in your program in the past. That does, but your Notice of Rights under Title VI is different than your Title VI policy, and this is what you publish, you post on your website or on vehicles or on transit centers. The other requirement is how to file a complaint, a copy of your complaint form, and of course the complaint form would be also translated in the languages identified through your LEP 4-factor analysis, which we will discuss shortly. You will list a Title VI investigations, complaints, or lawsuits that have occurred during the past 3 years, which you are completing your program for. You can list those in a chart or some type of matrix. If you don't have any, you also have to note that you don't have any. Not just skip it, because then it will be assumed that you didn't include it for a reason, and that will be found as a deficiency. Your public participation plan, and we'll touch on that a little more down the couple of minutes. Your LEP plan, which includes the results of your 4-factor analysis. Also new is the racial breakdown of non-elected advisory councils. This has nothing to do with your board of directors, but those who are appointed by your board to provide advice on policies that your board will end up acting on later to ensure that the racial breakdown of those committees is reflective of your community and that you are not disenfranchising the protected classes from being part of that process. Also, a narrative describing subrecipient monitoring and how you do that, how you check on your subrecipients, how you ensure that they're following the Title VI requirements. And also a board of directors resolution or meeting minutes that the board has approved the program. Now, there is additional requirements of board approval in addition to the actual approval of the program, and that will be part of Chapter 4, which I'll touch on in just a second. Where do we get, again, the requirement to notify the beneficiaries of the protection? You'll notice where it's published, how you disseminate your notice, the translation, and how the subrecipients also have that notice. And there's a sample in Appendix B. One of the questions was where to get Title VI training. FTA has agreed to fund a course through the National Transit Institute, NTI, and they launched the first course in May of 2015. There's been several courses, and the next course is in Wichita, Kansas this month, April 19th and 20th, and they just added the last course for this fiscal year for June 22nd and 23rd. We just received word, and it's going to be in Colorado Springs. So if you are interested in attending that, you can access the ntionline.com to get on that list and ensure those classes fill up fast. Also, the requirements to the procedures for filing a complaint, ensure that that's in your program. Your procedures on investigating, how you go about investigating your complaints, your complaint form, and on that one, I have to highlight that you have to ensure that on your complaint form, you highlight the protected Title VI classes, race, color, and national origin, if you were going to call it Title VI complaint form. If you're going to call it discrimination form because you're going to have other classes protected, such as gender, sexual orientation, or such, then you can call it a Title VI complaint form because you have other than the protected classes. So, but if you're going to have more, it's okay to do that. Just call it something else, as long as you, within that form, have race, color, and national origin as some of the areas that someone's submitting a complaint about. And also, you have to post your complaint procedures on your website so people know how to go about doing so. I'll just switch my slide. It's having a little. Okay, I think it's a little slow, so I'm waiting till it switches over. Okay. Okay, my slides are not moving for some reason. Let me see if I'll try one more time. Okay, there it goes. See, now it's going back fast. I think I kind of touched on that already. On the requirement to record and report transit-related Title VI investigations, complaints, include them. Those are allegations of discriminations on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Now, these complaints have to be associated with Title VI. If you get complaints because a passenger said that another passenger looked at them the wrong way or whatever it was, you don't have to include those. Only those that are Title VI related, that you have deemed to be Title VI related. And lawsuits and active investigations by other agencies other than FTA. So if FHWA has an investigation, then list that. FTA knows which complaints are being investigated for the agency that you're submitting for, and of course complaints. The public participation plan should contain proactive strategies, procedures, and desired outcomes of what you intend to gain from your outreach. It is suggested for you to have sample meetings if you already have dates when you will hold them. You have to ensure that within your plan you include how you're going to have your meetings in meeting formats. If you're going to meet a small community group, maybe you have a small group and a community building, or you have something really big and at a church, depending on the interaction of your community. And no one but you knows the best way to reach your community. Again, on the LEP, this is something that grantees are often trying to get additional guidance on, and it's the reasonable steps that you've taken to ensure meaningful access to the benefits, services, information, and other activities that you provide. This is done by completing the limited English proficiency assessment of the four-factor analysis, where you have you identify languages within your area. So you look at your census data, typically your American Community Survey, where you look at the number of a proportion of LEP persons eligible to be served or likely to be encountered by the program or recipient. You will look at those, and the threshold that's typically used is 5% or 1,000 people, whichever is less. That's pretty much the guidance, and we'll touch on that again. Now, just because you've identified that language that's 5% or higher or 1,000 people within that pocket does not mean that you have to translate automatically into that language. The next thing you look at is the frequency in which the LEP persons are coming into contact with your program. So for this particular factor, you would have to survey your staff or your passengers as there has to be a way of surveying who's interacting with your agency. For instance, in Los Angeles, they identified 24 languages that met the threshold. Out of those 24 languages, the agency had to go back within the customer service reps, the call center, their operators, and they narrowed down those 24 languages down to 8. So they used 8 languages to communicate vital information and their vital documents. Also, the nature of importance of the program activity or service that's being provided. If it's fixed route, if it's paratransit, or such, you have to look at the importance and how that impacts your passengers' lives. And also, fourth, the resources available to the recipient, as well as the costs associated with that outreach that you have. And many times, you can partner with community agencies to assist you with that. But then you have to develop a language assistance plan, which is as a result of whatever you found in your LEP four-factor. You will have a conclusion of, based on your four-factor analysis, these are the languages that our agency is going to provide assistance with. Describe how you will provide the language services, and describe also how the notice to LEP persons about the availability of language assistance will be done. It does not help if you have assistance, but people don't know how to access that. Again, in your program, describe how you will monitor and evaluate the language access plan, and how you will train your staff to provide timely and reasonable language assistance to your population. I'm going to touch really fast. I know we've reached 10 o'clock, and I'm not sure if we have a few minutes of leeway to complete a couple of things on here. There is training also available. There's some webinars that have been recorded previously. That's on the FTA, Office of Civil Rights page for Title VI. There's recorded on how to conduct service and fair equity, and there's currently some service equity analysis webinars being done by the Office of Civil Rights. And that is one of the areas, again, that will probably be enhanced in the upcoming revisions to the circular. As you move forward with the four-factor analysis, some vital documents that you need to keep in mind in translation of those languages you've identified, it would be consent and complaint forms, applications. For instance, if you have paratransit service, that would be one. If you've identified that your users have the need for that the system, written notices of rights, denial letters, decreases of benefits, and of course, the notice of persons' rights under Title VI. The safe harbor is what constitutes what the threshold that I alluded to earlier about the language group that constitutes 5% or 1,000 persons, whichever one is less. And this is adopted from the Department of Justice safe harbor provision. The minority representation on boards, we touched on that and why that is important to include that and include it in a table with the numbers of the membership, not necessarily percentage. We've seen people put a table and you have X% of the members. If you have 5 members, then put how many of each of those members are, male, female, and then race and gender. If you want to put it in a nice little chart, that would be helpful. When you provide assistance to subrecipients, ensure that you assist them and provide them sample notices, complaint forms, procedures. Again, the primary recipient is supposed to assist the subrecipient, but when it comes to the complaint process, the subrecipient must handle that on their own initially and bring in the primary recipient when an issue comes up that cannot be resolved, because ultimately, if there's a Title VI violation, the primary recipient is the one responsible because they're the ones who are receiving the funds. Also, include a monitoring. If you're going to monitor your subrecipients every 6 months, how you're going to do that. And just remember that a non-compliant subrecipient comes down to you, the primary recipient. One of the things that you also have to ensure is how you collect your subrecipients programs. How do you ensure that you're providing training for them in case they need it? And FTA, when they're conducting a review, perhaps a triennial review or perhaps a Title VI compliance review, may ask for a copy of those to ensure that you are keeping track of those. The determination of site and location for facilities, I know this was something that was asked earlier, but I will clarify. The Title VI analysis require for building of facilities, construction of facilities, which would include storage facilities, maintenance facilities, and operation centers. Even if you're constructing or adding to an existing facility, you would conduct a Title VI analysis addressing issues or impacts to the protected classes. This is different than what your EJ would look at. Remember, when you have a NEPA analysis or on environmental justice, you're looking at something that's being built with federal funds. The difference here is on Title VI, this may not necessarily have federal funds included because of the change in the Restoration Act of 1987 that said that even if you're not providing, even if you don't have federal dollars associated, you still are responsible for adhering. So if you may get federal dollars for the planning of your facility, but not for the construction, you're still responsible for adhering to Title VI requirements on that. The facilities does not include bus shelters, transit stations, and power stations. The reason why bus shelters are not included is because those typically would be part of your amenities description. And there was a question asked, and I will address it right now, in terms if a bus shelter is become an issue or a safety issue, and it's being removed at the request of the police department because of crime of such. What FTA would advise you to do is a police department has to understand that you also have the responsibility to protect and provide the same shelters to the community itself. If you're going to remove it, you have to do an analysis of what the impact to the community is. Because if all you're doing is removing it in the minority Title VI protected population, but there's a safety issue, you have to document and explain why you're doing so that you're not going to be hit by a potential Title VI desperate treatment lawsuit, where someone says you removed it because it was in the minority neighborhood, and now the minority neighborhood does not have any shelters, but all the shelters are in the non-minority neighborhood because of crime of such. So again, if you're going to do that, you have to properly document, talk to your community, and find the best solution that meets the best needs for you as an agency and also the community that you're serving. While crime is an issue that impacts many communities across the country. If every single agency said, there's crime, there's drug deals coming on, we are not going to have a shelter here. So anyone in this community who wants to use the bus is going to have to, you know, weather the bad weather and the rain, because you're trying to prevent the crime from happening. You have to see what the benefit is and properly document that. That is the advice that FTA would recommend. Also, complying with the facilities, you have to be aware of some other potential impacts. You have to conduct it during the planning stage. And again, if a disparate impact on the basis of race, color, or national origin is observed, you may locate the project in that location if a substantial legitimate justification and there are no alternatives with a less disparate impact. And that is the definition of what the legal test is defined as, and you will see that in the circular as well. The main thing I would talk about on Chapter 4, because I know we're over time, is the fact that this applies to transit providers that meet a threshold. And again, you have to be, and for Chapter 3, everyone has to provide the requirements under Chapter 3. For Chapter 4, you have to meet a certain threshold. If you provide demand response or just paratransit services, only Chapter 3 requires. If you provide fixed route service, even if it's 3 buses, you still have to do some elements of Chapter 4, but not all. And that would be if you are located in the new circular in a UZA of 200,000 or more and have 50 or more vehicles in peak service required to follow Chapter 4 requirements. The only thing that those smaller grantees that have less than 50 buses and don't meet the threshold, the only thing they're required to do is to have service standards, system-wide standards and policies that have to be included in your program on how you provide service. The other ones are just for the other requirements on this table are only those that are 50 or more in a large UZA. And the evaluation of service and fare equity changes, you have to provide those and include those in your program, in your next program. If you're seeking technical assistance, then you can submit that to FTA prior to your board adopting those changes. And a question was asked, if a service change is being done that requires a transfer of service. Number one, a trigger of service change analysis would be what's in your major service change policy. If you have in your major service change policy that any change resulting in hours or miles or headway change or such, if that's part of that, then you would include those changes and review them to ensure that you're properly documenting your changes. If your change requires you if the transfer change would require you to have to pay an additional fare, then that would also trigger a fare equity analysis to be done. This is really looked in depth in the Title VI training that I mentioned earlier. Again, these are the contents of Chapter 4 with your system-wide standards. I apologize for having to rush and I'm out of time. But I think overall, I think I'm pretty much finished. We did it and I only went over by 10 minutes. So the FTA has a new website. Please familiarize yourself with where the new Office of Civil Rights information and technical assistance is provided. And again, please access your Regional Civil Rights Officer for assistance, and technical assistance will be provided upon request. For going over by 10 minutes, I try to address the questions as best as I could, and I want to thank you for your time, and I want to turn it over to VTA at this time.
Thanks, Aida. Thank you, Lynn. This concludes today's webinar, and I hope we see the participants on today's call at our VTA Annual Conference and Bus Expo on May 24th and 25th in Fredericksburg, where we will feature other FTA staff workshops, including ones on recent safety rulemaking, trams and environmental justice, and the FAST Act. So a link to the conference program and registration can be found on our website, vatransit.com. Thank you again for joining us today. Goodbye.
Hello?